Hey everyone, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. I hope you're doing well out there. And in today's video, I wanted to talk about something a little bit different, which is focusing more on the spiritual, mystical experience and of using psychedelics, which I think is quite honestly an under-discussed topic here on this channel. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you already know that I tend to focus more on the kind of psychological, therapeutic, trauma work side of things a lot, which is really important, really valuable, of course. But there's almost like a whole other face to psychedelics, which is this side of accessing ecstasy, bliss states, transcendent experiences of oneness with the universe, connection to all of life, divine love, these kinds of profound mystical states that are ineffable and hard to describe and beautiful and exquisitely life-affirming. And this is something that I want to talk about more on the channel because it's a passion of mine. I think it's deeply valuable and deeply important. And so I wanted to spend today's video talking to you about one of the ways that you can kind of shift your attention on a psychedelic experience, at sufficient dose with sufficient safety, of course. One of the ways that you can shift your attention, one of the things you can do that tends to direct you towards having a mystical experience if you're interested in that kind of thing. So if this intrigues you, please do join me for the rest of the video. Let's talk about it. Okay, so a little context here, and then we'll get into what this movement of attention is that you can do. So part of my work here, in my own personal life, as well as, here for the channel, with the courses I'm building for you guys, with the posts I do on Reddit, part of my work in, really becoming a good coach and a skillful coach to support you with this has been to look back at some of the things that I've learned that are perhaps kind of intuitive, automatic, unconscious pieces of learning, and to try and decode that and bring that out of the unconscious, out of the kind of just, I just know it, into perhaps a more well-articulated blueprint of understanding. So turning the unconscious to the conscious, decoding that so that I can hand that over to you guys as a piece of information or a set of instructions on how to do something, right? So this is, perhaps part of the work for me that is hardest in a lot of ways, but also some of the funnest and most rewarding. So I spend a fair amount of my time thinking about my experiences and the things I've learned and things I've discovered and been shown, and how to describe them to you, how to decode that and make that user-friendly, so to speak. And if we're talking about mystical experiences, right, where there is no identity, there is no sense of self, there is no I, there's just the body having sensations that are registering, a sense of unitive experience with the totality of life, for lack of a better way of describing it, that becomes some of the trickiest territory to begin to articulate and decode. And, sure, of course, we have all kinds of religious and spiritual frameworks from all kinds of traditions around the world we can pull from. And there's, of course, even just in the psychedelic community, a good history of, your Alan Wattses and your Ram Dass's and all these different kind of descriptors to pull from, which I certainly do. But I wanted to see if I could just take a crack here at explaining to you something that I've realized is a really important distinction between when we are perhaps on a strong dose of a psychedelic and we are still very much identified with the body and having a trip, versus when that pivots over into the sense of self dissolves. I'm not making sense of things, I'm not processing information, and I kind of merge into a felt sense of oneness, a mystical experience. And I think that this is a skill. I want to be clear here. I think this is actually a skill. And it's a skill that you want to learn because there are times where, quite frankly, you get to a certain place of being so high on a psychedelic that being in your identity structure, in your ego, in your mind, in your emotions, in your narrative becomes very confusing and uncomfortable and more challenging and more stressful. And if you understand the skill of how to open up the pivot I'm about to share with you here, it can absolutely turn a journey from a lot to super smooth and ecstatic and wonderful and profound and blissful, perhaps even stronger, but somehow feeling safer, easier, more flowing, more aligned, more clear, more effortless, because your ego, the part of you that is the doer, that is you trying to process things, chills. And so, by definition, it is effortless, right? And so I think this is a valuable skill. I think this is also really useful for anyone who may just be kind of a psychonaut, who wants to know more about mystical experiences, is curious about that, has heard about ego death. I'm sure I'll do another video about that and kind of the gross memetics around how that's been distorted online. But I get it. There are a lot of you out there who are spiritually curious. I think that's natural. I think that's healthy. I think that's normal. And that psychedelics hold this potential, and you want to know how to tap into it. So in this video, we're about to talk about exactly what this shift is as best I can describe it. Again, these experiences are subjective, sometimes a little intuitive, sometimes more of a felt sense thing where words don't totally match feeling perfectly, and it's kind of hard to describe. But I'm going to take my best shot here. So let's talk about how you can shift your attention and how that might point you towards a mystical experience. So what you'll notice a lot if you do psychedelics and you start to get into the dose ranges where ego dissolution becomes much more of a possible outcome or a potential or a way that things can go, right? So if we're talking, I would say kind of north of 2.5, maybe 3 grams on psilocybin, depending on the mushroom, maybe lower depending if it's really potent mushrooms, or somewhere in the neighborhood, I would say of 200 micrograms and up on LSD. You start to get into this territory where the potential to have an ego dissolution or spiritual experience starts to arise, and it becomes intense, and the vividness of the experience becomes amplified. It's very loud in your body. The physical sensations, the vibrations, the sense of energy, the sense of life force flowing through you. If you have closed eye visuals, generally the patterns and colors are very clear and vivid. Your thinking becomes perhaps more fluid and fragmented and shifting between moments of silence and witnessing, and then really thinking, getting big insights, big ahas, and then shifting, or perhaps tracking multiple different parts of your personality and really realizing that there are different narratives inside of you happening concurrently. You might start to get a sense of like having an out-of-body experience where it's a little hard to function in your body, right? Like standing up, walking around, talking, relating as a normal physically embodied human being becomes a very daunting, confusing, overwhelming, strange task, right? So I'm trying to set up a description of kind of this cusp of where you kind of know like, oh, this is mystical experience territory. So if you find yourself in this kind of state where you're like, oh shit, this is weird, picking up a glass and drinking water is suddenly very hard to do and strange. Someone asked me a question 5 minutes ago and I forgot to answer it, and now I'm remembering to answer it. Someone calls me by my name and I didn't recognize it. These kinds of experiences are strong hints that you are probably too high to really be trying to use your identity, your ego, if you want to use that term, anymore, right? And that's really, I think, the cue to go lay down and let yourself just melt into the experience and have a mystical experience. Okay, so hopefully you get kind of the zone I'm talking about here. If you're at that kind of place, what you want to do is really want to shift your attention from, when we're in a more ego operational, identity operational kind of mindset, it's more like questions of narrative. So it's questions of who am I, what happened in the past, what do I want for my future? What are my relationships about? What do I think about this thing happening in the world? What do I think about that person over there? What do I think about this narrative in society? What do I think about that thing over there? What do I think about these figures in nature? And we're kind of having these these insights about relationships, about narratives, about themes. A lot of it can be very personal, but it can also be not so much about us. But there's subject and object relating going on, right? I hope you get this. I hope this makes sense. So So the question is usually some flavor of what's the relationship here, who am I, who are they, this kind of a thing. The pivot that you want to make to turn your attention, and this really is a use of attention that directs where you go, and this is kind of one of the key understandings, that you have the power to shift your attention, and that will shift your experience, is that you want to shift it from what do I think about all these objects and figures and relationships to what, instead of who am I, it's what am I, if that makes sense. So instead of, them and me and what's this relationship here, looking at the current of energy that animates you and animates them and is a connective cord between the two of you. Right? So the what am I, the fabric of life force, the fabric of energy, if you want to think of it that way, the fabric of awareness, if you want to think of it that way, or consciousness, if you want to think of it that way. What am I? What am I made of? What are these electrical signals moving through my body? What is this? And how do I open up to that and allow myself to experience more directly not who I am, but what I am as a life form, as a life force, right? Now, when you move your attention in this direction, it will intensify everything. So heads up, fair warning. Your visions will get stronger. The body sensations will get stronger. The sense of fluidity and ungroundedness will get stronger. And the key there is to tune into it and then relax into it, to kind of allow yourself to kind of melt into it and be absorbed by it. One of the instructions and one of the ways that I learned about this is you want to say, it says like, trust the tide pulling you into connection with all of life. And I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it. There's like a magnetic pull that wants to pull you into kind of a melting, kind of a dissolving experience. And what you want to do is allow yourself to dissolve. And as you do, what will happen, kind of paradoxically, is your senses will become more vivid and more sharp in your body. So even though you're kind of letting go of the boundaries of your body and kind of melting into the floor or the bed or what have you, and feeling yourself connected with the life force moving through you that's also kind of around you, and feeling the boundaries between where your skin ends and where the air begins around you, kind of feeling kind of blurry in a good way. Ironically, as that's happening in your awareness and your attention, your body will generally kind of go through waves of what you might think of as purification or healing or clarification, and your visuals might get sharper, they might get more colorful or more clearly patterned. Your body sensations in general might feel more balanced or more energized. Sometimes your hearing, like your ears will kind of pop and open up, and your hearing will open up. Your sense of smell may open up. Your nasal passage may open, and you may breathe easier. There's a lot of these kinds of strange physical sensory experiences that actually correlate with this kind of transcending of the physical. And why that is, I don't exactly know. I certainly have my theories. I'd be happy to talk about it in a future video. But this is kind of the territory of ego dissolution, of dissolving our identity, of having a mystical experience and merging into the all one of what? All one of life force, right? So we're kind of tuning into what is my life force and how is that connected to all of the life force, right? And that awareness really is the doorway into a mystical experience. So I hope that makes sense. Again, this is one of these things that's kind of a felt sense, intuitive, deeply subjective thing that's hard to put into words. So let me know if this resonates for you, either something you've experienced or kind of makes sense as something that might be possible for you. So so let's just kind of summarize this and we'll wrap the video. Okay, so hopefully if I've done my job, you have a better understanding of perhaps a place you didn't know you could go, or a place maybe you've been a little stuck in your journeys, where you get like these strong, it kind of really comes on strong, and you're kind of stuck in this kind of identity trip space, but your identity is kind of dissolving, and it's kind of strange and overwhelming and overpowering, and you don't really know how to have that transcendent mystical experience that people describe. So hopefully now that I've described this, you start to understand it, that essentially what you want to do is pivot from focusing on relationships and focusing on yourself or your narrative or who you've been or what you want for your future, or processing your emotions, or processing or trying to do things, or trying to identify with archetypes or all these other movements of the identity structure of the ego. You essentially want to shift to, instead of who am I, what am I? What is this thing that animates all of these visions and ideas and thoughts? What's the life force that makes my heart beat, that makes my lungs breathe, that makes my body tick, and how is that connected to all the rest of the life force around me, in the room, in the space, the other people that might be with me, and life as a whole, the whole cosmos. So that's really the shift that, if you really tune into at the right moment, at the right dose, in a safe setting, all these things have to be lined up just so, because it becomes super sensitive and super suggestible. And of course, if your system gets spooked, it can be really hard to get into the space. But if we set everything up just right, and you feel safe, you feel good, you have a sitter, you can go there comfortably, this is kind of the space that starts to open up, and this is where that doorway into the mystical is, if you turn your attention in that direction. I will say that once you know this, it's very possible to access this even on lower doses. So mystical experiences become possible even just in meditation when you're sober. Once you really understand this, they absolutely become possible on kind of more moderate doses of psychedelics. Like it gets harder because it becomes much more about how you're using your attention, and efforting your way into surrender is a kind of a paradox and doesn't seem to work very well. But there is, if you get good at opening up to this state of this felt experience, once you start to learn it, it does become something that's more accessible to you without having to really go through the ritual of taking these huge doses and, kind of flirting with the edge of overwhelm so much. So, and hopefully you have this experience. I'm sure, as you know from the research, mystical experiences are strongly correlated with really good mental health outcomes. Generally, a reduction in depression, a reduction in anxiety that lasts for 6 months or longer, generally a sense of well-being, a sense that this is one of the most meaningful experiences of your life. And I think that's just what's been quantified in the studies. What I also see is generally people shift their values a bit. They value relationships more. They value others around them more. They value the present moment more. They value their quality of life more. Things like, exercise and being outside and relating to people and eating good food and taking care of oneself. I think all of that is downstream from recognizing the preciousness and the sacredness and the power of life. And I think that really comes from these direct encounters with a mystical experience. So if you've never had one, try this out. See if it works for you. If you have had one, I'd be interested to see if this resonates for you as something you recognize and you're like, oh yeah, I know that state. I know where he's going with this. I've been there myself. Leave a comment down below. I'd really appreciate it. I always appreciate the dialogue here on the channel. And if you like this kind of content, as always, please do me a favor. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you find this valuable. Please do share it with others. I'm trying to do the best work I can here on the channel and kind of, level up the conversation and offer my own 2 cents as someone who's both kind of a lifelong psychonaut and someone supporting people with using psychedelics to heal and transform their lives. So Much love to you. I hope this is useful. And also, if you do me a favor before we go here, leave a comment and let me know if you want more content like this about kind of the spiritual side of psychedelics. I try to be well-rounded. I try to be truly integrative with my approach and cover the whole spectrum from, the very rational, scientific, logical, study-based understandings to perhaps the things that are kind of in the middle, that are kind of make sense but are perhaps not well measured in science yet, to the things that might just be outright mystical and spiritual. So if you like this end of the spectrum, again, this is a passion of mine. I'd love to talk about it more, but I want to know that it's of value to you. So leave me a comment about what you think. And with that being said, thank you for watching. I really appreciate all of you guys. It's an honor to have this conversation with you and do this work and be able to contribute in this way. So thank you so much. I'm happy that these videos are valuable to you out there, and I'll keep doing them. So, okay, enough said, enough rambling for now. Take care. I'll talk to you guys soon.